Welcome to the Language of Feelings. I'm Michael Tennant. I'm the founder and CEO of Curiosity Lab, the creator of Actually Curious, the conversation game that spreads empathy. And we are an organization that's committed to making empathy easy to learn and teach. We do that through consumer products. We do that through learning and development experiences like the one that we're about to engage in. So, sneak peek, it's going to be an interactive experience. We do that through content, like my book, The Power of Empathy, that'll be out this October on Chronicle Books. And we do that through tech. Right now, you can go to valuesexercise.com, and within 20 minutes, you will walk away with your core values and your purpose statement. Now, my road to getting here was a road of learning how to deal with emotions. In 2019, just before the pandemic, I tragically lost 2 of my older brothers within 3 months of one another. With that first loss, I learned that I'd been going through my whole life to 36 years old without really knowing how to witness the emotions that I was experiencing, and even worse, how to endure them, how to cope and move through to a place of resolution. I had to figure that out when I lost my brother, Chris. The weekend I lost him, I actually clinged back to the toxic coping mechanisms that had sustained me through my 20s and 30s in New York City. And that weekend, I hit my emotional rock bottom. I realized that if I continued down that path, I might be joining him sooner than I thought. Luckily, I had years of going to therapy and introducing that into my life. I had about 3 years of men's emotional leadership work where I meet weekly with a group of men. Actually, one of them's in this room here today, which warms me so much. A group of men where I learned how to connect with my emotions, how to endure my emotions, how to speak about them, and how to move through. Around that loss, I had to put together a paradigm that made sense for me to heal through. It started with first acknowledging the emotions in my body and gaining greater facility at recognizing and finding ways to stay with it. I turned to meditation, which I'd been doing for years, but I made it a regimen. That values statement and purpose statement that I mentioned, every morning, to this day, 3 years in, I write that purpose statement at the top of my journal. I check in with my body, and I make an assessment of where I need to focus my time, my energy that day. And then I combined it with motion, especially when it had to do with the more difficult emotions of fear and anger and sadness that were coming up on the daily basis. I learned to turn to yoga or turn to a long run as a way of processing that emotion, letting it dissipate a bit, and being able to actually return to my life in a grounded way. So fast forward to the pandemic, when our whole worlds globally were upended. I was able to remain grounded and almost cataloging that process that I took to heal from those 2 losses. Those turned into what I now call the 5 phases of empathy. The first phase is the language of feelings. By looking inward, sensing those emotions, gaining information from them, I was able to pour into my purpose, using the purpose as a lens through which to process what should I be doing next. As I wrote about this work, I wrote about somatic experiencing. I felt perhaps I was a vessel that could communicate this complicated concept to people who look like me. Skills that I didn't learn until my mid-30s, I wanted to make sure that I could get them into the hands of young black and brown boys and girls across the country. On the night of the death of George Floyd, I wrote an essay. I hadn't known what had happened to this man. I wrote an essay after experiencing the feeling of shock in my body after seeing a God Bless Our President sticker in the drive-thru of a Starbucks in Florida. And when I realized that my body had gone into a shock state and sort of breathed into that, I started to sob. Because I realized that I had experienced was the result of driving around the country, seeing signs. Any moment I saw a cop in my rearview mirror, my body went into that same shock. The same shock I was feeling from a sticker. Something that would be, for the majority of this room, not even noticeable. So I wrote about that experience that night. The experience of going through life, experiencing shocks, not knowing how to notice them, how to label them, and what to do next. I wrote about that essay and woke up the next morning to the news of the death of George Floyd. And it was almost a bittersweet moment because that essay that I wrote started getting shared all over the internet. And a month later, my world started to turn around. At that moment, I was living in living in Florida. I was renting out my apartment in New York City to make ends meet. And I'd returned back to living with my parents for the first time in over 20 years. They did not understand why I'd invested my time and energy into my purpose of spreading empathy. As immigrant parents who had done a lot to sacrifice to get me where they were, it just didn't compute with the way that they processed how I should be investing all of this experience and privilege and opportunity. But I did, because I had that purpose statement, and I had the tools to check in. And shortly after that, my process of remaining resilient through those losses, and then through the pandemic, and then now as this new entrepreneur spreading empathy, that process got written about by the New York Times. And that winter, that Christmas, got featured in the Today Show. From that point forward, my life has been dedicated to bringing tools of empathy to spaces that don't have them. And quite frankly, that's most of the spaces that we exist in, most of the jobs that we return to. So today, Curiosity Lab has generated over $1.5 million in revenue spreading empathy around the world. This card game is available in Nordstrom, in Crate and Barrel, in Anthropology. It's in the MoMA Museum, the Brooklyn Museum. A beautiful tool out in the world that spreads empathy just by playing. We've been invited into NASA, into Johns Hopkins, into Stanford to teach empathy skills. IDEO, which created design thinking, has brought Curiosity in 3 times to support their teams in well-being. And I'm proud to announce that, or to share with you all, that in October of last year, we received an investment from Pharrell Williams and the Black Ambition Prize to continue our mission of spreading empathy. And funnily enough, that whole process started. Y'all may not see this up here, but I'm an introvert with social anxiety. And I came to South by last year for the first time. I went to the Inc. Founder House, and I awkwardly went up to the CEO of Black Ambition. She told me about that prize. That night, I checked in with my emotions. At 1 o'clock in the morning, I submitted my application. And a year later, Pharrell Williams was on my cap table. So the work that I did to heal from losing the 2 most important people in my life, I now have transmuted that into a process that allows us to use those difficult emotions to fuel our purpose. And now I'm here to share the first phase of the 5 phases of empathy with you. So it's called the language of feelings. And what it is a shared lexicon around empathy. So what is empathy? A common way of understanding empathy is the 3 types of empathy. The first is cognitive empathy, and that is the ability to understand emotions on an intellectual level. And I'm going to help you to be able to do that by equipping you with what is called the 5 core emotions, all right? So if you've got a notepad, maybe you've got a great memory, you can remember it. If you have a notepad, write these down. The 5 core emotions are joy, fear, anger, shame, and sadness. And just by having ease of access to those 5 core emotions, you can begin to start getting curious about what it is that you're experiencing. And we're gonna practice that here today. Now, what does that mean? Get curious about what it is that you're experiencing. Let's move into the second type of empathy, which is somatic empathy or emotional empathy. And that is the science that we actually feel our emotions in our bodies prior to being able to make an intellectual connection to what it is that we're feeling. So I'll use myself as an example. I'll start with the easiest one, joy. When I feel joy, I can feel just this, it's almost like the universe is pulling my cheeks up. I can feel an effervescence on my skin. I feel heat, sometimes coolness. I can feel a rippling in my skull. Anger similarly shows up as heat in my body. I've seen at times where underneath the table I look down and my hand is clenching into a fist almost to protect myself. Fear often shows up as tension in my chest. Shame, I always notice when I'm averting my gaze from the room. All right? These are some examples of how emotions show up for me, but we are not the same in that regard. We don't have the same experiences. So these emotions may show up differently for you. One thing I will share that is a common question that will allow you to really focus on experimenting with this is, why are there 4 of those emotions that are more difficult? And that is because our emotions are born from our nervous system. They're here to keep us safe. So we have 4 that are a bit more challenging. I won't say hard, but maybe a little bit more difficult because they're all good. They're all here to give us information about what we need. Joy, I like to think of it as, I'm in a good place, I'm in flow, I'm recharging. I'm preparing for whatever else might show up in my life. So the third type of empathy is effective empathy. And for the people leaders in the room, maybe the coaches, the parents, we all have this, and our goal is to strengthen this. The example I like to give folks to kind of process effective empathy is when a coach, perhaps at a tense moment in the game, decides to call timeout. That coach is responding to this need to take the team and bring them to a more grounded place so that they can receive, they can process how they're going to execute, and they can go back out and execute from a more sort of resourced and prepared place. That is that coach looking at what's needed in the situation and acting. So effective empathy is understanding emotions on a cognitive level, understanding emotions on a somatic level and trusting your gut. But the key thing is being able to lower your ego and attune to what's needed in the situation. So that is our goal as leaders as we strengthen our empathy. How do we trust our inner voices and do what's needed? All right, so that's enough about my story. Let's get some practice in, because the work that we're going to do here, it sits within the realm of mindfulness. It's the work that allows us to show up in these rooms, meeting new people, and grounded in our integrity. I call it the language of feelings, is this phase, and the game we're going to play using the Actually Curious Happy Hour Edition is a little exercise that we came up with, the Happy Hour Edition, that's right. It's questions that are intended to help us explore the things that makes us happy, our dreams, our cherished memories. The prompts for this question really came out of that healing work that I did the summer of 2019. And actually, that I made this deck alongside my then girlfriend and now wife. So it's a very special deck. And what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna actually need some volunteers. Everyone's gonna get an empathy workout in today, all right? We figured out how to make sure everyone gets an empathy workout. And, okay, so the way the exercise works is, I'll have a question, and this question will act as a stimulus. I'm going to read the question out loud, and what our job is to check in to see if there's any physical reaction that we receive after hearing and visualizing the question. We're going to check in and scan for any change that we find. Maybe it's a little bit of tightening, maybe it's sometimes a flushness in the brain. Whatever shows up, we're just going to notice and take note. After we've completed that scan, there's nothing else to make note of. We're going to make an attempt to label the sensations using the 5 core emotions. So again, if you don't have them, they are joy, fear, anger, shame, and sadness. For this exercise, it's not as important to answer the question. I know some of the folks who volunteer will want to answer the question. It's really about taking this question as a piece of stimulus and practicing how it reacts within our system. So I'm going to model this first. And while I model it, I want you to try to practice listening with curiosity. Try to practice attuning to me. And see if you could even feel what it is that I feel as you listen to me sharing. And then I'm going to need one volunteer to, all right, I already got a volunteer in the room. I'm going to need one volunteer to make sure that I'm seen and heard by sharing back what you heard me share. How's that sound? All right, you're going to get a couple times before you get to try this yourself. So, all right, I know I pulled those questions, so I'm going to pull one at random from the deck. But first, I'm going to just arrive for a second and just check in with what's present in my body currently so I can actually notice a change. Because I've been speaking, I've been presenting, so I'm in that mode. So I'm going to get into my body. All right, I'm there. And my question is, what did 12-year-old you want to be when they grew up? So the first thing I noticed is a sheepish smile, just like half of my face. And as I was reading the question, I did notice a little bit of shakiness in my hands, but when I acknowledged it, it slowed down. I noticed some tightness in my chest, but after noting that change in my hand, I feel it loosening. I can feel myself slowing down. Okay, so that smile, joy, it's one of my favorite questions, and also just noting a new set of comfort doing this exercise in front of a room of this size. The shaking in my hand, let's say a mix of joy and fear. I'm really excited to share this with you all. The tightness in my chest, fear, the loosening, calming down. And I'm going to skip my answer to the question. All right, so my volunteer. What did you hear? And what did you see?
I was visualing my own 12-year-old self.
You have to mirror back what you heard me share and make sure that I feel seen and heard.
Right. Yeah, so I noticed the trembling in your hand as you reach for the deck. I immediately noticed your smile. I connected that with you remembering a memory of yourself when you were 12 and maybe a hope or a dream that you had. And then, yes, like the mask in front of it.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I felt curious. I actually want to know what the 12-year-old you wanted to do.
All right, fine. So first of all, I feel very seen and heard. Thank you. And I do want to share that this is one of my men's group brothers. He's been by my side for 3 years and was very instrumental in my healing as well. So thank you. No, you're not done yet. Back up here. All right. So y'all will get one more chance to be in the observing seat. And actually, I'm going to need a volunteer to play Akash's role here, which is to make sure that, oh, okay, I got a volunteer already. Perfect. So Akash, you're going to step into my role here. You can do it from there.
Can they share the mic, or do you need another?
They can hand the mic over afterwards. So I have 3 questions here, Akash.
Yep.
You'll get to pick your poison.
Okay.
And remember, your goal here is to first check in with what you feel physically, then connect them to the 5 core emotions.
Yep.
All right? So which of these 3, left, middle, or right, do you want to do?
Right.
You take right. Now, it's a reminder to check in with what's present before you hear the question. And everyone else, you're going to listen in and try to see if you can almost practice that muscle of feeling what it is that Akash is sharing. Akash, your question is, one trait I'm proud to have inherited from my parents is blank, starting with the physical sensations first.
Yeah, so I'm feeling a chill going down my head, down the side of my shoulders. I can feel the hair on my beard standing on end. I feel almost energy running down my spine. I'm feeling my back starting to sweat. And
Yeah, what was that?
yeah, I'm associating what these feelings are in terms of an emotion for me.
Using the 5 core
Yeah,
emotions.
it's joy, and I'll just slightly modify it. It's pride. So I felt like this balance between shame and joy, which was like, am I actually wanting to share this with people? Like, what am I proud of that my parents gave me? And I'm recognizing that sweat in my back, that's shame. Like,
Yeah.
will this be received or not? And then the rest of it is the pride, the joy,
Yeah.
and being grateful of what my parents gave me.
Wonderful. So for starters, how many people by show of hands feel some resonance with what Akash just shared? That's wonderful. All right, my volunteer, you got to make sure Akash feels seen and heard in his share. What'd you notice?
First, when you were talking about it, I definitely could attach it to joy and fear, especially the fear of like not knowing if you wanted to share it with everybody.
And what happened physically?
The tingling in his head, the sweat, the like, ooh, do I want this to come out or not? What is that thing? And trying to think about all the things that you are proud of, but also like you're not sure if anyone will understand it or resonate with it or connect with it.
Akash, do you feel seen and heard?
That encapsulates how I feel perfectly.
Kelsey, do you want to be my next volunteer? Okay. So Akash, before you go, do you want to share what that thing is that you're proud of?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind for me was just the sense of duty that my parents gave to me, and that's something that I'm proud of.
That 12-year-old me wanted to be a performer, a singer, or a prosecuting attorney. And somehow I'm on stage for you. So somewhere in between maybe. All right, so Kelsey, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so we're going to change the rules just a tiny bit here, just to close out. You're going to be our model, but what I want everyone to do now is you also do this exercise. All right? So Kelsey, I'm going to pay close attention to you, and I'll make sure you're seen and heard. But I want everyone to check in with their own experience. Okay? And after Kelsey shares, I want to see if there's anyone who experienced something different in the room. I would love for you to share that out loud. All right, so Kelsey, we have 2 questions,
Okay.
left or right?
Your
Left.
right, my left.
Right. Right, okay. All right, so now everyone, check in with where you're at. See what's present in your body. There may already be some tension just being called upon to do this exercise, right? So that's your baseline for this moment. Are we ready?
Yes.
All right. Our question is, ghosting is real. Have you ever ghosted someone or been ghosted yourself? Starting with the physical sensations first.
Clamminess. Anger definitely comes up in my head.
Anything else physical before you move in?
Just like racing thoughts. My heart rate is up because I'm remembering the time that I've been ghosted or that I've ghosted somebody.
Yeah.
But also some sort of weird shame and joy at the same time because it's almost like I know that it was like that was like the necessary thing to happen.
Yeah, and how's that shame and joy show up physically?
Probably all in like the racing heartbeat as well and the like shakiness, but also knowing that like my life is calmer without someone in my life.
Yeah.
Not saying ghosting is like the right thing to do, but when you're young and you don't know how to say how you feel, you kind of have to just like disappear.
Yeah. All right, thank you. That was wonderful. Really good job. A round of applause. Now, show of hands, how many people had some similar feelings? All right, just look around the room. Keep your hands up. All right. Is anyone who felt something different, like markedly different? Okay. Can I have a volunteer to share what you experienced? Okay. In the back middle. Sam, not you.
I felt a real tightness in my jaw
Yeah.
and kind of the back of my tongue and in my head that I would associate with guilt over being the ghoster.
And if you had to pick one of the 5 core, what would that be? Joy, fear, anger, shame, sadness.
I think shame.
Yeah.
I think shame in that guilt response of the times. I think I let go a lot of the times where it's others to me, and
Yeah.
I hold on to the times where it's me to others.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to share anything different that they found? Because the reason we do this is not everyone reacts the same way. And just by hearing the shares and the wisdom in the room, your aperture of what emotions could show up like expands. So I saw a hand over here.
Sorry, I don't want to, trying to respect the people next to me. I got the urge to laugh, actually, because I'm, happily married now, and it just reminded me of how much better off I am.
Yeah.
And, instead of like the, clammy hands or anxiety ridden, I just was laughing about
Yeah.
how I'm in a better place.
So if you had to label that joy,
Bingo!
you had to label that joy with joy.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Y'all, that was Feelings Roulette. That is the main exercise in our first phase of the 5 phases of empathy, the language of feelings. Know that this exercise, it sits within the realm of mindfulness. We just used a card game to be that stimulus to practice how our emotions show up. But in any moment, for the people in the room who've ever experienced being gaslit or a subtle microaggression, you didn't know what was going on in your body, you now have a tool. You can trust that feeling. You can slow down. You can label that feeling. And then you can choose what you want to do once you know what it is that you're feeling. Thank you, guys. Curious. And definitely look out for my book, The Power of Empathy. And I have flyers over here if you're interested in learning more about it. Thank you.